After knocking on tens of thousands of doors, attending scores of meet and greets, campaigning for weeks on end, it all comes down to the last 3 days for hundreds of candidates seeking your vote on Thursday. Because on Thursday, Ontarians will go to the polls and choose their next provincial parliament. And no part of this province will have a bigger say in that outcome than the 905, the belt of cities, towns, suburbs, and exurbs that fan out from and around Toronto. Tonight, live from Mississauga City Hall, what matters to the 905 and why that matters to you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is presented by Ontario's 33,000 chartered accountants, public policy leaders since 1879. More information is available at casforchange.ca. And by contributions to TVO by viewers like you. Thank you.
What started as a sleepy suburb is now the third largest city on the Great Lakes, after Chicago and Toronto, and the sixth largest city in Canada. Its population of nearly 750,000 has doubled in 25 years and consists of cultures and ethnicities from literally all parts of the world. And it is this growth and constant change which makes Mississauga, and for that matter the broader 905 region, the key to political success in Ontario today. In 1995, Mike Harris's Progressive Conservatives swept the region. They won every seat. 8 years later, the 905 swung around to support Dalton McGuinty and the Liberal Party, who seems poised to win the 905 sweepstakes this time around. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mississauga for our final Your Vote 2011 Agenda on the Road special. Since February, we have been taking the pulse of this province to find out what the issues are that matter the most to you in this campaign. Yesterday, we were at the Mississauga Living Arts Centre for our Agenda Camp, where engaged citizens came together to tell us what they think this election should be about.
How does the Green Energy Act fit relative to what we would think of as a traditional green platform?
Economy management as it links to the other...
Healthcare, education, and jobs.
All right.
How does the government plan to restore the confidence in citizens?
Even if you were left-wing ideologically, you could say government should be doing less because it should be better organized.
Maybe the idea is to get out of the ideological wrestling, right? Because we would like to make this, to the existence of this, like a civic discussion.
As more and more people get involved, and when we have more and more of these meetings, we'll get to understand each other, and hopefully our politicians would see that we do matter, and it's not the political parties that matter.
At the end of the day, we actually had a question that everybody agreed on. If our politicians could get together and put away their party badges and just go out and have meetings like this, our democracy would be much better off.
And that's where we pick up tonight, by putting our citizens' agenda to our 4 local candidates, and here they are. Charles Sousa is the Minister of Labour. He's seeking re-election for the Liberals in the riding of Mississauga South. There's Charles. Jeff Janicek is the PC candidate for Mississauga South. Jagmeet Singh is the NDP candidate in Bramalea-Gore-Malton. And Otto Casanova is the Green Party candidate in Mississauga-Arundel. Good to have all 4 of you here this evening for our last Agenda on the Road before E-Day. A reminder that we are streaming this broadcast live on our special website, yourvote2011.ca. There he is, to know him is to love him. Mike Miner hosting a live chat. Mike will touch base with you later in the hour to see what people are saying online. We remind you, if you're using Twitter tonight, use the hashtag YourAgenda and jump in and join our conversation on Twitter. Okay, candidates, time now to talk turkey. Here is what we were told by Mississaugans, what matters most to them. Issue 1, right here. Roll tape, please, Michael.
Given the significant 20% growth of population in the 905 GTA area, compared to the 7% growth in population in Ontario, there is an annual shortfall in social services funding in 905 GTA to the total of $708 million. My question is, if elected, will your government commit to delivering social services funding on a per capita basis to address the inequity in access to childcare, senior supports, housing, youth programs, and developmental services.
Okay, we heard this a lot yesterday, the notion that, and that gets a hand in the room. The notion that Mississauga, Brampton, in fact, so much of the 905, the population has been burgeoning, but the services have not followed. And I guess the people yesterday who came to Agenda Camp, starting with you, Charles Sousa, want to know what you plan to do about that.
This is a very serious issue in our community and has been for some time. That's why we've done so much already to try to continue uploading services for the Peel region and all the municipalities, and we've made a commitment that we'll continue to do so. I know my opponent hasn't made that commitment, but more importantly, we've also increased funding on a per capita basis for our schools. Our Peel board has gone up by over 79%. It is the second largest funded board in all of Canada. But more has to be done for the very purpose that this man just mentioned. We've had an increasing, rising population in the GTA and in Peel specifically, and we haven't been able to keep up the pace, but we've done a lot. Now, in regards to our education system, we've got more new schools, we've got more teachers. On a per capita basis, it's actually gone down, but the funding has even gone up. But we've got more efficiencies in the system. Whereas in other parts of the province, the municipalities, and in those instances, the population has fallen, or in the schools, they've fallen, but the facts are they still have to continue to fund those schools.
Jeff, what do you say on that?
Well, you know, Steve, these are absolutely important issues. As a lifelong resident here in Mississauga South, I can tell you I really care about making sure that Mississauga gets what it's due. And one of the things that we talk about in our plan, Change Book, is to make sure that we rein in some of the public sector salaries that have grown. Public sector salaries in Ontario under Dalton McGuinty have grown by 40%. And so what we need to do is to make sure that we give arbitrators that the ability to make sure that when arbitrators are making a decision on public sector salaries, they're taking into account the taxpayers' ability to pay. And this is going to give municipalities a greater ability to fund social services. And you know, on the issue of healthcare, I got to tell you, one of the things that we want to make sure we do is that when we spend money on healthcare, it goes to frontline care. Right now, far too often, healthcare dollars that are meant for the front lines, for doctors and nurses, are being diverted into bureaucracy. That's why we're going to shut down the LHINs. Take that $300 million and put it right into the healthcare system.
Jagmeet, what do you say on this?
Yeah, I think it's very important to recognize that the question really comes down to funding for social services in municipalities. That's really the question, and I think to answer that, we have to look at some history. I mean, Mike Harris started the uploading of services, or the downloading of services, my apologies, so that municipalities who don't really have the income revenue, I mean, all cities really have are property taxes. So how do we expect cities to be able to afford these social services when all they really have to rely on is property taxes? What happens? Property taxes went up. I mean, and citizens are suffering from that. Ontarians are suffering from that. So what we need to do is we need to be committed to downloading some of those, or uploading those services, putting them back on the province, which has the proper income stream. Provinces have income tax, they have sales tax, they have the revenue source to adjust and to deal with some of these social services. So the NDP is committed to, on one particular area of municipality services, is transit. We're committed to a 50% sharing with municipalities of transit costs if the municipality, if the cities guarantee to freeze transit fares. So that's a real commitment to providing social services for our communities.
Otto, the Greens, where are they on this?
Well, I agree with Mr. Singh that the municipalities can only raise revenues from property taxes and service fees. For the Green Party, one of the most important aspects of this issue is by uploading the $1.5 billion that was requested by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. This amount of money, this is by 2018. And the association, the AMO, has asked for this promise to be made. The Green Party commits to this promise. The Green Party also wants to make sure that we honor our senior citizens so that they can live, you know, independently as long as possible, and that they are able to obtain the kind of care at home whenever it's needed. The most important issue for me in particular is the issue of poverty, in terms of social services, and in specifically child poverty. I think it's appalling that we have, 150,000 children using food banks in Ontario, and Politicians have promised to eradicate poverty by 2010, I believe it was, and nothing has been done about it. So I think at least a member of provincial parliament should, even if it individually, should commit to at least maybe dedicating 50% of their time to this issue alone.
Okay, Charles, you heard the allegation that you guys have been in power for 8 years. You've done nothing about child poverty. That's the allegation.
There is, when we came in 2002, there was about 42% of single families in poverty on social assistance. That's been reduced now to 30%. We've also introduced a child care benefit of $1,100 per year, which the other parties voted against, or I should say the PC party voted against. We've committed to increasing that to $1,300. But the issue that we speak of is even more broad than this. You need a strong voice at Queen's Park to deal with the federal government, because we're not getting our fair share on the provincial level, let alone in the Peel region. And these instances is what we got to fight hard for. This is where true leadership comes into play. We need to insist that we get our fair share from the Fed so that we can service our communities and our municipalities. We've already made that commitment that we will continue to upload those services, and we have when it comes to children's issues, when it comes to children's mental health, when it comes to child care services, when it comes to dental.
Let me get Jeff to speak to this. Yeah. Jeff, you know that your leaders come under some criticism because the NDP and the Liberals have both committed to continue the uploading, another, I think, $500 million or so still to go. It would mean $29 million more to the bottom line of municipalities here in Peel. Tim Hudak hasn't made the commitment to upload. How come?
Steve, what we're going to do is we're not going to download. We're not going to download anything onto municipalities. But what we're going to do is work with the municipalities, treat them as willing partners. Always make sure that we're consulting with the municipalities and communities when making decisions. And one of the things we're going to do is to fix that Arbitration Act. If we do that, then we'll ensure that municipalities aren't constantly forced to pay higher and higher salaries out, which results in poorer service.
Jagmeet, is that a fair point? If they change the Arbitration Act, if the settlements aren't as rich as the Conservatives are concerned about, the need for uploading will no longer be there as much?
Absolutely not. We can't attack our public sector. We can't attack people who are, every day, getting in there and working for their livelihood. And that's not who we need to attack. We need to be taking care of our workers, taking care of our citizens, especially during these tough times. That's absolutely the wrong approach. What we need to do is make a commitment that as a province, we put people first for a change. Let's put their concerns and their needs first, and let's commit to uploading those services so that the province, which has the income revenue, can truly take care of these services because we have that income source.
You want to come back on that? Nobody's talking about attacking anyone. All we're saying is that arbitrators have to respect the ability of taxpayers to pay the bills. 40% increase in the last 8 years in public sector
red
salaries.
herring.
My herring.
These guys are talking about...
Hang on, Charles. Let him finish. Let him finish.
I can certainly assure you, my wife's Nina's salaries have not gone up 40%. And we've got to fix that. That's the way we're going to improve service.
Okay, Charles.
80 to 90% of all negotiated settlements with the municipalities and their employees is done by a collective bargaining agreement. It's not done by arbitration. So that's not the issue. And the issue is they're trying to tilt the bargaining, the leverage of power to the municipalities away from your police officers or your firefighters or your public service. Most of that is already done, and they do have the ability to pay criteria. All of those things that they've talked about exist in legislation already. What we are talking about, though, is the taxpayer who's not being supported with the uploading commitments by the Progressive Conservatives. That means more of your tax dollars is going to go on your property tax. That's what happened in the past. That's what they're proposing now.
Jeff?
Steve, when adult McGuinty Liberal starts talking about taxes, you better watch your wallet. This is the same government that had the highest income tax hike in the history of the province of Ontario, the highest sales tax in the history of the province of Ontario. If you're concerned about taxes, 4 more years of Dalton McGuinty is not the answer.
I'm trying to figure out whether that applause means they approved of the tax increases or they like what you have to say.
My opponent doesn't talk about the 16% tax cut permanently on individuals, on your personal income tax, or the fact that we are now the lowest tax provider with regards to business tax. New tax for businesses are 50% less than they were before. And they voted against that. They voted against those very measures.
I want to be very clear on the question. And Thomas, I know you're behind me. Thomas Mahoney asked a question. I'm going to go to him in a second to see if he's happy with the tenor of the debate so far and what he's hearing. But his question was, he's looking for per capita funding of social services. The population has burgeoned here. The services and the amount spent by the province hasn't kept up with it. He wants per capita, and I haven't heard anybody, unless I missed it, say they're committed to per capita spending on social services. Are you, Jagmeet?
I mean, specifically a policy basis, personally I believe that makes a lot of sense and we should do that. Policy basis, I can't specifically say that. I can say that we are committed to uploading the service back onto the province. That's something we have to do, and that's going to address the fact that cities don't get enough funding for their services.
Otto, are you committed to this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is part of our platform, and it's part of the fact that we're going to upload those $1.5 billion as requested by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario.
Jeff?
Look, we want to have funding formulas that work, and we need to make sure that municipalities are properly able to fund services.
Okay, is that responsive to the question?
Steve, we are going to make sure that we have funding formulas that work, and we're going to make sure that we can work municipalities. A part of that is fixing that Arbitration Act. We absolutely have to do that so we can fund social services properly.
Yeah, their
Charles?
funding formula is to cut your services.
Stand by, everybody. Go ahead, Charles, finish up.
Yeah, their formula is to cut services. The per capita funding that we speak of here has actually, we've changed the census on our education system to try to be more equal in terms of what's the funding formula has been. It has been out of whack. Keep in mind though, that here in the South, our per capita funding, I should say in Mississauga South, it's actually higher on a per capita basis than it would be in Brampton because of the population inefficiencies. We have to do better. We've already made some changes to census to keep up to pace because what we're doing in Peel is what has to also be done in other parts of the province.
All right, let me introduce you to the guy who posed the original question. This is Thomas Mahoney. Am I saying it right? Mahoney?
You are saying it right.
You're not Mahoney, right?
Not
You're
Mahoney,
a
I'm a Mahoney.
Good, okay. What do you think of what you've heard so far?
Steve, first of all, thank you for bringing everybody back to what the initial question was. The conversation has gone to downloading, and municipalities have been the level that you put it at. It's not to the municipalities, it goes directly downloaded to the families who take care of the family members who need social services. For example, special services at home. There are 9,000 families in Ontario on a waiting list for these funds for over 3 years. For passport funding, there are over 4,000 families in the province, and 70% of these families all reside in the GTA 905 Metro Toronto area.
Thomas, tell us, so what do you want them to do?
We want you to have a proper formulation going back and maintaining that ratio properly to the areas that have of growth in the province, recognizing that we still have to maintain the support levels in the rest of the province.
Did you hear anything in the answers so far that suggests they're prepared to do this?
At the very end, about 15 seconds worth.
At the very end?
At the very end when you brought them back to the question.
Who?
I think all three were trying to get back to the per capita funding model. However, up to that time, it was more going back to medical services, et cetera, et cetera. Once again, the question was specifically about the social services, and this particular region is terribly underfunded in that regard on a per capita basis.
Let's see if Charles can help you out anymore.
Yeah, and so what we have done in certain respects, especially with autism, mental health, children's issues, breaking the cycle of poverty, we've tried to increase funding on those issues. But you're right, the per capita funding here in the Peel region and the GTA, because of its growth of population, hasn't kept up pace as it would in certain other areas. We've tried to make more commitments, we've tried to invest even more, but you're right, it's tough. And when I go around the province in the Finance Committee, it's always a challenge. On the one hand, people and companies and corporates say, cut our taxes, make us more competitive. And on the other side, they're saying, please don't stop providing social services. We made a commitment during the recession, though. During the worst times in our history, we never left those most vulnerable behind. We continue to support them. We got to do better.
Let me hear from you on this.
Steve, these guys have had 8 years, and they haven't gotten it done. So we're going to make sure that we work with municipalities, make sure we get that Arbitration Act fixed. That is a real problem. 40% salary increases, and we're wondering why services aren't being funded properly. That's the answer. The other thing we're going to do, if I just add in something I'm particularly proud about in our platform Changebook, is that we talk about allowing people that are on ODSP and Ontario Works.
ODSP is
Ontario Disability Support Program, to be able to work part-time and keep some of their savings, so that we provide folks with an incentive to get a permanent job. I think that's fantastic.
That is the end of question one. We'll make sure you two guys get to start off on question two. Nick Nanos had a poll out just the other, was it today? Might have been today or yesterday, in which he said, according to his findings, jobs and the economy, the number one issue right now facing Ontarians, and that's what this next question is about. So Michael, if you would, roll tape.
Unemployment is high, the economy isn't growing, and innovation is sluggish. In this environment, newcomers, youth, and historically disadvantaged groups face particular challenges. What will your government do to both actively get involved in the economy to address these issues and get out of the way of the private sector so it can grow the economy and address these issues.
Okay, I should just say, let's just tell it like it is. We didn't hear that question on the floor here for some reason. I don't know if you heard it at home, but you did hear it at home? Good, because we didn't hear it here on the floor. However, I do remember the question. It was a kind of a two-pronged question. It was, on the one hand, what are you prepared to do to get out of the way, to get government out of the way so that entrepreneurs can do their thing and grow the economy? But on the other hand, invest in the things that we want government to invest in order to make sure that we don't go into a double-dip recession and that the economy stays as modestly growing as it is right now and perhaps can improve even more. So a kind of a two-pronged approach. We want, but we don't want. Okay? That's the question. Jagmeet, why don't you start on that?
Certainly. I think that we need to make sure that our priorities are clear. Our priorities are this. We need jobs in Ontario. So our tax laws and our incentive basis to create these jobs, to encourage entrepreneurs, should be in such a way that encourages jobs in Ontario. So what we're committed to do as the NDP is that if you create a job in Ontario, if you build a factory in Ontario, if you train employees in Ontario, if you invest in machinery, manufacturing equipment in Ontario, you'll get a tax break in Ontario. That's a true commitment to ensuring that there's jobs made in Ontario. As an alternative, right now we've had years and years, you have 8 to 12 years of corporate tax cuts, which have essentially been blank checks. Blank checks given to companies with the hope that they'll create jobs in Ontario. But what we've seen is that if you give a corporation money, they can invest it in other companies, they can keep it in cash reserves, which most of what companies are doing is actually keeping those tax benefits in their own cash reserves, or they can ship jobs to other countries. We need an assurance that a company will create jobs in Ontario. That's why we are committed to rewarding job creators. And with small businesses, we need to cut taxes for small businesses so that we can encourage their growth, because small businesses and day-to-day working families are the backbone of Ontario, and that's who we're committed to protecting.
Okay. Applause for the NDP in Mississauga. That doesn't happen every day of the week, does it?
Not really.
There we go. Okay.
Maybe I'm striking a chord. Thank you.
Okay, Otto, you're up next.
Well, I think the Green Party is the one that I think it has the best formula to improve the economy here in Ontario. In fact, we're the only ones that are actually talking about introducing a revenue-neutral tax system that will actually put more money into people's pockets, and it will put more money into small and medium-sized businesses in order to generate more jobs. This revenue-neutral tax system, nobody else is talking about it. In fact, the PCs have tried to demonize the term by calling it carbon tax and so on and so forth, and then probably accusing the Liberals of considering the carbon tax. And the fact is that economists around the world, reputable economists around the world and in Canada, have said that this is the best way to move forward. And if you look at the example of British Columbia, British Columbia has actually implemented this carbon tax or revenue-neutral tax system. And alongside Newfoundland, it's one of the fastest-growing economies in Canada. So let me just so we understand what you're talking about. You're not, the overall tax burden would be the same, but you want to shift the taxation, tax bad behavior, tax pollution, give those who are greener a break. Is that the idea? Yes, that is correct. We will increase revenues for the government by taxing what we don't want. So, for example, pollution, waste, inefficiencies. Take that money and put it in people's pockets, right? The other thing that the Green Party is the only one that is talking about is about balancing our budgets by the 2015-16 period. The other parties are waiting to do this by the 17-18 period. And if we were to go with the Green Party platform of balancing our budgets by 2015, we would actually be 1 year behind all the other provinces, because the rest of Canada is actually promising to balance their budgets by 2014.
Okay, thanks for that, Otto. Jeff?
Steve, our plan change book recognizes that, unlike the Dalton McGuinty Liberals, the government can't be all things to all people. We need to set priorities. So we've outlined two key spending priorities: healthcare and education. That's what people tell us they want us to spend money on. Those are important areas. We're going to increase spending on healthcare and education because it's the right thing to do. But outside of that, we're going to find savings of 2% on the dollar. That's achievable and that's realistic, and it's something we need to do in Ontario. Right now in Ontario, we have a $16 billion deficit. Under Dalton McGuinty, there's a lot of statistics in politics, but this one is shocking. It took 136 years and 23 premiers to accumulate Ontario's debt, and Dalton McGuinty has single-handedly doubled that in the last 8 years. We have a fiscal problem in Ontario. So we're going to set priorities and eliminate that deficit by 2017.
I've heard you guys say that a lot, and I just want to be clear, though. You could say the same thing federally for the Conservatives as well, couldn't you? Every government in the Western world primed the pump over the last 3 years, right?
Steve, as I go door to door, what people tell me is, I don't mind paying taxes. I like to pay taxes when I know that my money's being spent well. But what we've seen under this government is continuous waste. We saw that $1 billion wasted on the e-health scandal.
Let me get Charles in here.
Extra bureaucracy in the healthcare system.
Charles, the Liberals.
Well, the question, I think, was around the economy and how do we create those jobs and how we make better incentives for those businesses to invest in Ontario, and what are the ones that we want to gear and look to for the future. One thing that we did was open for Ontario and open for business. This was a legislative plan that enabled us to reduce red tape, also do tax reform, provide those incentives for those companies to invest. We now have over $20 billion of investment from private sector in Ontario that never existed before because of those initiatives and strategies we put forward. My opponents voted against that. They voted against those tax cuts and incentives for business to come to Ontario. They seem to be afraid of this new innovation. It's called, more aptly, change back, because they're not looking forward to what we need to do for innovation, what we need to do for green economy. And I talk about green economy because it's not just about the environment, and not just about clean air and clean water and our health. It's also economic benefit for all of Ontarians.
Okay.
We're looking to the future.
Let me jump in here on this, because I think people understand the campaign is almost over, and they've understood where the Liberal government has pointed to and said, we need the government to be active here, we need to subsidize, invest, choose your word. I'm not sure they yet know what the Liberal government is prepared to keep its hands off of, and that was the other half of the question. Where does the Liberal government feel its nose doesn't belong?
As I said already, $20 billion of those dollars are private sector investments in Ontario. It's already created over 20,000 jobs. And where we did put our hand in was to try to protect the automotive sector in Ontario. My opponents call that corporate welfare. We save 400,000 jobs and maintain Ontario at the forefront. We're also looking at innovative automotive strategies like electric cars. We are the ones that were able to sign up a deal with Toyota coming to Ontario. We have here in Ontario, in Clarkson, in Mississauga, a manufacturer providing electric batteries for those cars. Okay. These things wouldn't have happened had we not made those investments and made those partnerships.
Here's the part where I have to play the heavy and remind all of you that the former governor of the Bank of Canada, David Dodge, did say very prominently at first in the Globe and Mail and then our program a few days after that, that all of your platforms, in his view, are from Fantasyland. And he called them all impossible. And he said after the election was over, we would look back and you will have been seen to have lied, because none of the platforms, in his view, was in touch with reality. Jagmeet, you want to start speaking to that?
Certainly. I think that I respect Mr. Dodge's opinion, but where I can just distinguish it is, we look at the Conservatives, and what they want to do is increase spending and cut taxes. That just simply does not work. That's an illogical formula to begin with. How can you increase services and then cut taxes? We are at least approaching it with a logical approach. It's this. We will roll back corporate tax rates to their original 14%. We've seen time and time again across the world that even if we increase our corporate tax rate by 4%, we are still amongst the lowest corporate tax rate in the world. We are the lowest corporate tax rate in the surrounding states and provinces. Even if we were to increase it by 4%, there needs to be an increase. Let's increase it on the multi-billion-dollar banks and insurance companies so that they can share with the rest of Canada, the rest of Ontario.
Would that have an adverse impact on job creation?
The reason why it would not is we would reward job creators. If you create a job in Ontario, which is where we need the jobs, then you'll be rewarded with a tax break.
Jeff, how about it?
Steve, the answer is we have a jobs problem in Ontario under Dalton McGuinty, right? I mean, we have lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. Our unemployment rate has been above the national average for over 50 months in a row. And the shocking thing is that traditionally, Ontario has been the leader of Confederation. It's been the engine of our economic growth. And Ardalton McGinty, Ontario has become a have-not province. But Ontario can lead again. The Ontario PCs have a 5-point jobs plan. We talk about reducing taxes on businesses. Cutting red tape by 30%. There's far too much regulation in Ontario right now. We need to allow small businesses to create jobs. Getting those hydro bills lower. That's stifling our economic growth.
But let's go at this again. If you want to cut personal income taxes by 5% on the first $75,000 or something like that,
that's right, Steve.
You want to take the HST off hydro bills.
And heating.
Right. You want to take the debt retirement charge off the hydro bill. So you're going to go borrow $1.2 billion to go do that. Does all this add up at the end of the day? Can you cut taxes this much, spend what you say you will spend on health and education, and still balance the books in 8 years?
Steve, Changebook is about setting priorities. Changebook is about setting priorities. We can't be all things to all people. We would have loved to provide more tax relief, but we need to recognize that we want to continue to spend on healthcare and education. So we're going to reduce spending by 2% outside of healthcare and education, provide some modest tax and hydro relief, and we will balance the budget by 2017. Our platform is entirely costed. This is realistic and achievable if we roll up our sleeves and we're willing to do the hard work, and this government hasn't been willing to do it.
Charles, I need you to resist the temptation to go after him, because I just did that, and now, but you have to speak too. You have to speak to the fears that some people have, that this government has never met a program it doesn't like to spend behind.
Our program, our platform, which I had the privilege of chairing, by the way, and I've gone around the province over the past 12 months to prepare it. And I'm very proud of what we put forward. It was independently assessed and reviewed and costed so that we do have an affordable, realistic plan. My opponents has a $14 billion hole in that plan, and it has 9 times more promises than we do, and yet they seem to be the ones that are going to be able to get to it. But my point is that it has been independently assessed. We recognize that it's also dependent on the flourishing and the vibrancy of our communities and our economy. We need the economy to grow, but we need to provide them hope and prosperity and encouragement. We can't be negative, we can't provide fear. We can't tell people that are investing in Ontario, we're going to rip up your contracts. We got to recognize that what we're putting forward has a benefit to all of us concerned.
Okay, but there are many people who look at what your plans are on green energy and they aren't sold. And they're, in fact, worse than not sold. They're concerned that we're putting an awful lot of subsidy into something which at the end of the day may not pay off with the 50,000 jobs you guys are predicting. And I'd love to know where that figure comes from, 50,000.
We already have 20,000 of those jobs created. And we've already created more jobs in Ontario than all of Canada combined. We have over 140% return of those jobs that were lost during that recessionary time, the worst in our country in 80 years. So we have made an impact. We have made a comeback. We have a very, however, uncertain and sensitive recovery. We do not need any more uncertainty or any more messages coming out from the opposition or any parties suggesting that Ontario, you can't do those things. You can't go in that direction.
Jeff?
That's exactly where we need to go.
Let me hear from
That's
Jeff
our
and then
future.
Jugmeet. Jeff first, then Jugmeet.
Steve, the reality is with this, this green energy program, we got the high hydro bills. We never got the jobs. It's driving up the cost of hydro. We've lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs in Ontario. If we want to encourage industry to come to Ontario, we can't welcome them with a high hydro bill. The other thing it's doing, it's taking away the ability of families to spend. That helps to stimulate the economy when families have the confidence that they know they can go out and spend money. When they're facing a hydro bill that's gone up 84% in the last 8 years, they're not inclined to spend money.
Jugmeet, are you satisfied that the investments made by the Liberal government in the green energy area will pay off with the kind of jobs numbers they're forecasting?
Not at all. I mean, we've already seen that it's not just fulfilling their promises so far, and I don't see there's any real numbers to show that it's going to fulfill their promises in the future. Green energy is important, but it's more important that we put priorities on putting people first. Let's put priorities into really creating jobs for people in Ontario. How can we do that? We can give real incentives. I mean, originally the question was, what can we do to encourage jobs in Canada and jobs in Ontario? We have to be committed to that, and the way we can be committed is let's reward job creators. If a company creates a job, let's give them the tax break. Why would we just give everyone tax breaks? Give a tax break to a company that creates a job in Ontario.
For what it's worth, what I've heard so far in the campaign is that the environmentalists obviously like the Greens, they like the Liberals, they don't like your party so much anymore. They think taking the tax off gas is a dumb idea.
Well, I can address two of those. Taking the tax off gas is a reality to many suburbanites, many rural Ontarians who don't have the luxury of an amazing transit system like Toronto. I mean, Toronto has its problems as well. The reality is many people have to drive to work, many people drive as a living, and we have to protect those Ontarians. It's important to take care of them. Our green plan is conservation. I mean, Greenpeace has endorsed our plan in terms of the conservation component of it. I mean, David Suzuki's endorsement of the Liberals is a bit skeptical given the fact that there's some funding issues with his foundation and the fact that he's been tied with Mr. McGuinty. So again, that type of endorsement is a little bit questionable.
Wait a sec, are you saying that, saying there's something nefarious in his endorsement?
No, I just think it's a little bit questionable given that there is such a close tie. What I think instead we can look at, the NDP is committed to conservation, NDP is committed to moving away from nuclear power. We've seen the devastation of nuclear power, and we're committed to closing coal plants. What we want to do is move towards more conservation as a sustainable means of increasing green energy in the province.
Otto, let's get you on this.
Unfortunately, there are still a few people that when they talk about all of the parties not having their platform costed, they're obviously not looking, or I'm starting to think that they weren't looking at the Green Party platform, because our platform is fully costed. In fact, we have probably the most fiscally responsible way to balance our budget. For example, you know, unlike the NDP that would increase taxes on large corporations, the Greens are only going to freeze tax cuts until we balance our budgets by 2015, for example. But if you put the example of how do you create jobs with energy, the Green Party is the only one that's saying, take a look at the nuclear energy issue. The PCs and the Liberals, they want to move forward with nuclear power, despite the fact that we've already learned how much this has costed us and still costing us. We're still paying for the mistakes of the past. They still want to make forward. We're the only ones that are saying, not only do we recognize that Ontario is powered by 50% by nuclear power, but what we're saying is that no to new nuclear reactors, because according to a new finding, according to a new finding, a new study, for half of the cost of a new nuclear reactor, you can actually insulate 1.6 million homes in Ontario. Now, just think about the amount of jobs that you can create by insulating 1.6 million homes in Ontario.
Okay.
These are tens of thousands of jobs in the green energy building.
Okay, appreciate that answer, Otto. Let's let me take a second here just to do a little business with the folks at home, so grab a sip of water if you need to. We want to remind everybody we're here in Mississauga, Ontario tonight, the last stop of our 5-city tour across the province of Ontario as we head towards E-Day. Thursday, October 6th is voting day. We've been to Sudbury, we've been to Niagara, we've been to Ottawa, we've been to the Hammer, and now we're in Mississauga finding out what are the key issues in the 905, and in particular here in Mississauga. We hope you'll be with us on Thursday night, election night. We really do presume to tell you that we think we're going to have the best coverage, the quickest results, the best analysts as well. We have been covering this provincial election every single night since the writs were dropped in the first week of September, have really made a commitment to trying to bring the issues to the people of Ontario through TVO, their channel. We would also urge you not just to watch us on television, but check out what we're doing online. We've got videos, we've got maps, we've got blog posts, we've got video of rookie candidates, like this guy. You were on our show last Friday, weren't you? That's why I recognize you so well. Yeah, so please check out our website, yourvote2011.ca, where you'll find so much more beyond what we're doing on television as well. Okay, 2 down, 1 to go. Our last question from our Citizens Assembly, our agenda camp that took part yesterday, and we've got it on tape right now. Michael, if you would, roll tape.
Voter turnout and citizen engagement is declining, but Toronto and Mississauga city summits show that citizens do want to be involved in the decision-making process. What would your party do to increase local and provincial democracy and accountability in Ontario?
Okay, this question's about governance. It's about getting people more involved in politics, allowing them to connect to you folks better, how we improve our democracy, and how we improve your accountability to us. So, question. Charles, you go first. What measures would your party implement to engage citizens of Ontario more directly in their democracy?
Steve, you know, my father, who's in the audience, he fled a fascist regime in post-war Europe to find democracy. Put your hand up there, Dad. He
Where's he
came
been?
here in
Here he is here.
1953 to find freedom.
From where?
From Portugal. And one of the things he instilled upon me was to give back to the community, but also fight hard for fairness, prosperity, and being free, to enable us to have civil liberties. This is very important to us, and that's why I do what I do. That's part of the values that guide me. One of the things that our government's done is made government more transparent. When we took office, you remember that there was a $5.6 billion deficit that was hidden from us. My opponents sold public assets like the 407 to try to balance their books, and yet we still ended up with a dismal effect. We made it so that it has to be completely transparent and open so that nothing can be hidden. We've done so consistently, even through all the other controversies that had occurred during our reign, during our time in power. We recognize that
was
we
a
have...
heck of a Freudian slip there.
We have to always keep ourselves in check. It's important, it's our obligation to you. Ultimately, as representatives, we represent you, and we're the ones that have to be accountable to the communities, and that's why we're staying and open in our relationship.
Would you give him that before they came in, there was no such thing as truth in auditing, truth in budgeting? The Auditor General didn't have to report to the public 6 months before an election to verify that the books were as they said they were. Do they get any credit for doing that?
Steve, you know, I got to tell you, what I hear from people is that they say this government has not properly consulted with communities. And I think before government decisions are made down at Queen's Park, you have to properly consult with communities. We've seen this on the energy file time and time again. The approach that this government has taken is to throw darts at the board and pick where power plants are going to be. They did this in Oakville, they did this out in the rural areas with the industrial wind turbines, and they did it in Mississauga with the Sherway power plant. They don't consult with communities before they make decisions, and then people get upset, and the government wonders why. That's why a Tim Hudak government will make sure that before we make key decisions that are going to affect communities, like power plants and like power projects, we're actually going to go out, roll up our sleeves, and consult with folks before those decisions are made, and that's going to strengthen our democracy.
This may have been one decision that you and Charles Sousa were on the same page on. I presume you agree with the cancellation of the power plant.
Steve, we have always been opposed to that power project, and
So
we
is
will
he.
permanently cancel it. They say they're going to move it, and I'll tell you, they said that after 6 years of planning, 10 days before an election, all of a sudden they said, you know what, we changed our mind. We're going to move the plant, and it's still being constructed.
You know what? I want to
We've
give
always been
everybody,
against it. We'll
I want to
cancel
give
it.
everybody a first kick at this broader democracy question, and then, you know, that's not a bad local example of whether democracy worked or didn't, or how consultative you were or weren't. So we'll come back to you, Charles, on that one. Go ahead, Jagmeet, on the original question.
Sure. Just before I begin the original question, not to go one up on Charles, but actually both my mom and dad are present today.
Now let's get them to stand up. Where are they? Come on. Stand up, stand up. That's great. I don't know why I feel like Richard Dawson at an episode of The Family Feud here, but anyway, let's keep going.
No, so back to the original question. I actually caught a glimpse of it on the screen as well. I think a bit of the question was about proportional representation. I think proportional representation is a great idea. I remember when it first came up in a referendum in Ontario. I think that's something that'd be great. I think that the problem with it wasn't worded properly, and I think a lot of people would resonate with the idea of having a proportional representation, meaning that based on the votes, yeah. I mean, if you look at on a federal level, it's kind of concerning that only 30% of the people in Canada have acknowledged or voted for this government that's in power, and the rest of the 70% of people didn't want this government. I mean, that's a problem in our democracy.
Sorry, say that again.
I think it's about 30% of people voted for the federal, for the Conservative Party in Canada-wide. Versus
they got 39.5%.
My apologies. Maybe I'm
but
not.
if you're saying, maybe what you might be saying is, and I don't know here, but if you're saying they got 39% of those voted, but only about 50+% voted, they actually only got 20% of the people voting for them.
Right. I was kind of in between that 20%. Thank you. That
Okay.
helps me out. So a small portion of Canada basically voted for the party that's in power, and that's a trouble. That's a problem with the way democracy is running right now. When it comes, yeah.
Okay. Otto, if you tell me you got 20 relatives out here behind me, go ahead.
They're all watching on TV. Well, we do want to end backroom deals. We want to end abuse on power, where political parties impose large projects on communities and unwanted projects. And the fact is that we believe that communities must have a say in the kind of projects that are put into their communities. They have to benefit from them as well, right? This is all what we call decentralization in government, where communities have a voice, they have a say, they are involved in issues of healthcare, they are involved in issues of energy, they are actively involved in public consultations. We would end no one-bid contracts, for example. We would like to see more public contracts put online. We would also like to accelerate the freedom of information access, right? Accelerate, but to a point where there is no need to make freedom of information access request, because most of that information should be online.
Okay, let me follow up with Charles now. Charles, I know you weren't a big fan of the power plant going in here in Mississauga, what is it, in Cooksville? Mississauga East Cooksville?
Yeah.
Right next to your riding. But do you think it looks passing strange to cancel this thing 11 days before an election?
Steve, my record speaks for itself. And to the members of the community who've been fighting our community, we have listened. That's the point. It works. As a government, we have stood shoulder to shoulder to recognize the issues of concern. And this is not the only situation that I have been fighting alongside my community to protect our future generations from another fossil fuel gas-burning fire plant, which my opponents seem to like. We are fighting for renewable resources, clean resources. We have flexibility now over these past number of years.
But on the issue of truth in government, which is what the question's about.
I get it. So what I'm saying is, until recently, they received the permits. We advised the proponent then, don't build because we're reassessing the situation because of proximity to homes. They were warned, and they did it at their own risk. And that's what's happening. We have made a commitment to our community because we've listened to the members of the community. I'm very fortunate to have a very engaged community and a number of leaders who have been very active on this. And as a result of their efforts, we have making a positive change going forward.
Jeff.
Steve, Charles would like folks to forget that he was sitting at the cabinet table of Dalton McGuinty when these decisions were made to impose power plants on communities that don't want them.
That's not true. Hang on.
I
think the decision was made 6 years ago and he was not in cabinet yet.
He's certainly been sitting...
Hang on. No, I just want to... I just want to make sure the record is accurate, and much to his chagrin, he wasn't in cabinet yet, but eventually he made it. Go ahead.
Certainly he's been sitting at the cabinet table recently as this project proceeded. And Charles would like us to believe that, this is just something that happened. But the bottom line is, he's sitting at the cabinet table. If he wanted to stop it, he could have. The approach we're going to take isn't going to say, you know what, we're going to make citizens fight after a decision is made and impose it upon them. We're actually going to consult with them in the first place, before the decision is made.
The fact of the matter is, my friends, the last number of years that we've been active on this file, no conservatives have shown up to any rally, any meeting, any discussion. I stood alone in the House fighting on behalf of our community. I asked for support. They didn't show up. And even at his own admission, when we had a rally 2 weeks ago, my opponent chose not to be there at his own choice. We are fighting for the community. We recognize that future generations deserve better. They don't go, and they haven't been there. And even during their time, we have a power plant already approved. They don't have a contract with us. That was done by the Conservatives 8 years ago, and it's in Clarkson.
You got the first word on this. I'll give you the last word on this, and then I want to introduce one more thing.
Steve, Charles has to go to events like this to apologize for his government's record. We would never have put that power plant in the community in the first place. And I refer you...
Okay. Let's hear about folks. Hang on.
Folks can look at page 23 of Changebook, in which we clearly state that the approach an Ontario PC government, led by Tim Hudak, would take is to consult with communities before decisions are made. That's the approach we take. And what we do is we go out and we work every day to make sure that we can change the government that wants to impose these decisions on communities without properly consulting them.
Okay, let me throw one more thing in here, and that is we got about 5 minutes to go before we hear from my friend Mike Miner over here. We heard a lot of really interesting ideas come out of yesterday's agenda camp, but one of the ideas that was put forward was about lowering the voting age as a means of getting more people more active earlier into politics. The theory being, if you got educational discussions going on in the schools about politics and kids vote from the time they're 16, they'll bring their folks in, their folks will bring them in, it's a way to encourage democracy earlier. Jagmeet, what do you think of the idea?
Honestly, I think it's an amazing idea. The reason being is that I had the opportunity to run federally, so I'm a rookie candidate in the sense I've only ran once this year. I mean, I ran this year as the first time being involved in politics. My entire team of volunteers and core organizers were under 32. I felt like the old person in the campaign office. Right now, my volunteer base is essentially a large amount, maybe 30 to 40 students in high school every day come out and are so engaged in the political process. We were covered by the Toronto Star on this issue, that how did you get so many young people engaged?
You want to give them the vote?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a great
on?
idea. 16, yeah, they'd be amazing. They're very intelligent. They have a lot of insight. They have a lot of passion. And it's a very important way to engage them at a young age so that they become vested in the idea of being involved in democracy.
Otto, voting at 16, what do you think?
Yes, I agree. I've met many 16-year-old young adults who would love to vote, and they're very knowledgeable about the issues. They're very motivated, and they're passionate about the issues. They're even more passionate than some of us who are of an older age. I think that and I agree with Mr. Singh on both issues, on that and on the fact that we should also open up the debate to electoral reform, because it doesn't really make sense that despite the fact that you have 100% of the people, even if you would have 100% of the people voting, okay, it doesn't make sense that 40% of the people elect one representative, and then the other 60% of the people who may have voted for 3 different political parties don't have any representation.
Understood. Jeff? We know voter turnout has been going down year after year after year. If you gave 16-year-olds the vote, might that be arrested?
Steve, I think we absolutely have to try and make sure that we engage young voters in the political process. My family came here as refugees after having escaped from communism in Czechoslovakia, and my mom and dad are here, but I won't make them stand up. They'll kill me.
Really? We're happy to introduce them if you want.
But I think what we need to do is make sure we involve people in politics. I was fortunate when I was actually in my high school years is when I first got involved in politics. I've been involved for 12 years. I had a caring teacher that fortunately passed away, but that took me down to Queen's Park, showed me how you can get involved.
Would you give 16-years to vote?
I think what we need to do is make sure we get as many young people involved in politics as we can.
Sounds like a no.
Well, you know what? We got to involve them. I'm happy that in our campaign we've had lots of great high school students that have been helping us out.
Okay.
I think it's great.
Charles Sousa?
You know, the number of schools that I've attended and the civics classes, these kids are very engaged. And the more we can do to have them participate at a younger age, just like all-day learning, the more they'll participate as they get older. And if we can find a way to enable the 16-year-olds to have some form of power, I think we could all be the better for it, because the sooner they get engaged, the better they'll be in the long run. But will they actually be able to vote? I would still find a way to use it sort of as a means by which to encourage their parents and their sisters and brothers to vote. But we need to get them involved. Anything we can do to do so important.
Okay. My hunch is if 16-year-olds could vote, I heard this yesterday at Agenda Camp as well. Somebody said 16-year-olds vote, marijuana gets legalized the next day, and the deficit is gone. Anyway. Let's just, while we have a moment here before we say goodnight, get my friend Mike Miner over here, who's monitoring our online chat. Mike, what do you got for us this evening?
The conversation online is about as tight as the race. It seems like all 4 parties are right in the mix. The Greens are the only one who aren't getting hammered for their record when they were in power. We have Sunny Yong online talking about the 905 in sort of a negative light. He thinks that the canceling of the power plant is a parasitic move, and not putting a power plant where the population is growing is irresponsible. But the general conversation online is about services. Jay Mandrick says that the burbs need transit funding from the province. People are talking about improving services and expanding access across all sorts of areas. AJ, not particularly concerned about growing the economy, it seems, says creating jobs are fine, but what kind of positive experiences surround that job you create? It's interesting that deficit reduction in the general economy is not front of mind in what you're seeing on the chat. When they do bring it up, Diane says that you need to reduce the debt and deficit slowly so that you don't crush our most vulnerable citizens and stimulate the economy if we need to. And NS Ahmed says that you can improve services and reduce the deficit at the same time. The improvements in delivery can potentially find you those savings. So that's what you are hearing online.
Thanks much for that, Mike, and people can go to yourvote2011.ca and continue the conversation.
Yes.
Thanks so much for that. Okay, that's our time tonight. I'm really glad that you four would take time out from your door knocking to come in and help us out with this broadcast tonight. We're really grateful that you not only came yourselves, but brought so many family members as well. Want to thank the audience for coming out as well this evening and filling up this glorious hall. It really is gorgeous here. Mississauga City Hall, you never look better with this beautiful audience in here behind. Tonight's program was produced by Hillary Clark and Allison Buck-and-Terrell, and I also want to say a special thank you to our director, Michael Smith, Mark Ford, and the entire technical crew for a great season of 5 on-the-road programs. Guys, we couldn't have done it without you. You were terrific. That is the agenda for Monday, October 3rd, 2011. Tomorrow night, from watching history to making history. They hope. We've got 6 ex-journalists who are now running in this election, and they're going to gather back at our studios at Yonge and Eglinton to tell us why they made the switch from reporting on the news to knocking on 30,000 doors and going through 5 pairs of running shoes. And a reminder, Thursday night, we're on at 8 p.m. We'll have the full results. We'll have the best analysis. We'll stay on the air until the winner speaks. And given how close the polls are, looks like we could be in for a late night. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for following us on yourvote2011.ca, and we'll see you again tomorrow night at Yonge and Eglinton. Good night from Mississauga.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is presented by Ontario's 33,000 chartered accountants, public policy leaders since 1879. More information is available at casforchange.ca. And by contributions to TVO by viewers like you. Thank you.
It is humanity's greatest invention, civilization.
It is something that sort of explodes onto the scene.
Find out what influences play a role in the rise and fall of different civilizations.
They are this sort of wellspring of aesthetic innovation.
It's history that we can learn from and avoid repeating.
And it actually shows the fragility of such a system.
Ancient Worlds, a 6-part series. Starts October 10th on TVO.